Eric Sullivan, 75, stepped into the bustling airport terminal, his back slightly hunched beneath the weight of a worn-out leather jacket. His weathered hands clutched a faded duffel bag, its zipper barely holding together. Inside, nestled between folded shirts and a shaving kit, was a small wooden box, the only keepsake he had carried since returning from the war decades ago. The airport buzzed with activity. Businessmen in tailored suits strode purposefully, tapping away on smartphones. Families with children scurried through the terminal, juggling luggage and snacks. A group of young influencers posed in front of a large digital advertisement, laughing and flashing peace signs at their followers. In the middle of all the chaos, Eric stood still, his eyes wandering over the bright lights and polished floors. A gentle, melancholy smile played on his lips. Today was his birthday. His son, Michael, a former Marine himself, had surprised him with a first-class ticket, a gift Eric never asked for and never expected. "Dad, it's time you treated yourself for once," Michael had said, pressing the ticket into his hand with a grin. "You deserve it." Eric glanced down at the ticket, the words first class, priority boarding, printed in bold. The words looked foreign to him, as if they didn't belong in his world. His last flight was over 20 years ago, and it was to bury his wife. Since then, life had been quiet, almost too quiet. He took a deep breath and stepped up to the check-in counter. A young gate agent with perfectly styled hair and a disinterested expression barely looked up as Eric handed over the ticket. "Sir, I'm here to board." "First class," Eric said, his voice soft yet resolute. The agent's eyes flicked up, scanning the elderly man from head to toe. His gaze landed on the small wooden box, slightly peeking out from the duffel bag. The agent's brows knitted together in annoyance. "First class?" he echoed, voice dripping with skepticism. "I think you're mistaken, sir." "No, my son. He upgraded me," Eric said, holding the ticket a little higher, as if the paper itself could justify his presence. The agent's jaw clenched. "First class is reserved for premium guests, sir. Celebrities. Executives. Not..." He gestured vaguely at Eric's worn jacket and scuffed shoes. "Not old men with dusty trinkets." Eric's hand trembled slightly, but he said nothing. The agent yanked the ticket from his grip and scrutinized it. His lips curled into a condescending smirk. "Policies changed," he said flatly. With one swift motion, he tore the ticket in half. The sound of ripping paper echoed like a gunshot. "Enjoy economy." The torn pieces fluttered to the ground. Eric stared at them, his throat tightening. Around him, the world moved on. Conversations continued. Laughter echoed. A young couple snapped a selfie nearby, oblivious. Eric bent down to pick up the pieces, his old knees creaking in protest. The wooden box in his bag shifted, its contents rattling softly, a haunting reminder of the life he once lived and the valor the world seemed to have forgotten. Eric straightened up, the pain in his knees a dull, constant throb. The pieces of the torn ticket trembled in his hand. Around him, the airport continued its ceaseless flow, people hustling to their gates, announcements blaring over the intercom, and the scent of overpriced coffee lingering in the air. He swallowed hard, forcing down the lump in his throat. This wasn't how he imagined his birthday going. Michael's voice echoed in his mind, full of pride and excitement. "Dad, you're going to love it. First class. Just for you." Eric took a deep breath and approached the gate counter again, his steps hesitant but determined. The young agent, now scrolling through his phone, didn't bother looking up. "Excuse me," Eric said, his voice steady. "There's been a mistake. That ticket was a gift. My son upgraded me." The agent rolled his eyes, still fixated on his screen. "Sir, policy is policy. The ticket was invalid. That's the end of it." Eric clenched his jaw, his fingers tightening around the wooden box inside his bag. The box pressed against his palm, solid and cool, a reminder of the day he received the Medal of Valor, a day that felt like a lifetime ago. Nearby, a group of young men in business suits snickered, glancing at Eric with thinly veiled amusement. One of them, with slick back hair and sunglasses perched on his head, muttered to his friend, "Old guy probably just wants free stuff." Eric heard it. He felt the sting of their words like a slap across the face. But he kept his gaze fixed on the gate agent, refusing to let his shoulders slump. Please, Anna, he said, forcing a smile. My son, he wanted me to experience something nice for once. I don't need special treatment. I just want to use the ticket he bought. The agent finally looked up, his expression exasperated. Sir, you're holding up the line. Take your bag and move along. You're not a priority guest. You're not anyone's priority. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Eric's lips parted, 1,000 words threatening to spill out. Words of fury, words of frustration. But instead, he nodded, his eyes glistening. Without another word, he turned away, the remnants of his ticket clutched in his fist. As he walked away, a little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve. Mommy, why is that old man crying? She asked, her innocent eyes wide and confused. The mother glanced at Eric, her gaze lingering for a moment, but then she shook her head, turning her attention back to her phone. Mind your own business, you sweetie. Eric continued walking, each step heavier than the last. He found a plastic chair in the farthest corner of the terminal, near the janitor's closet, and sank into it. The crowd around him surged and swirled, oblivious to the man clutching a torn ticket and a wooden box that held a piece of his soul. Eric sat slumped in the hard plastic chair, the world moving around him like a relentless tide. He placed the torn ticket pieces on his lap, the ragged edges a stark reminder of the disrespect he'd just endured. In his bag, the wooden box lay heavy against his leg, its presence both a comfort and a burden. Eric ran a callous thumb over the edge of the bag, feeling the familiar grooves of the box. Inside was the Medal of Valor, the symbol of a life-defining moment, a day when he was anything but invisible. Nearby, a janitor pushed a mop across the tiled floor, his eyes darting toward Eric occasionally. He hesitated as if he wanted to say something, but then his gaze dropped back to the ground and he kept moving. Across the room, a teenage boy sat with his friends, earbuds dangling from his ears, music blaring loud enough for everyone to hear. Dude, check this out, the boy said, showing his friend a viral video on his phone. They both burst into laughter, their voices echoing against the terminal walls. Eric's eyes drifted over to the large glass windows, where planes taxied across the tarmac under the gray afternoon sky. A slight drizzle tapped against the glass, the sound both soothing and melancholic. He closed his eyes and the airport noise faded away. In his mind, he was back in Afghanistan. The air was thick with the scent of burning oil and gunpowder. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting eerie shadows over the mountainous terrain. Eric's hands shook as he wrapped a blood-soaked bandage around Private Hale's leg, his own uniform torn and caked in mud. Stay with me, soldier, Eric whispered, his voice firm but trembling. You're going to make it. Just stay with me. Bullets whizzed past and shouts echoed through the smoky air. The ground shook as a nearby explosion ripped through the dirt, sending shards of metal and debris flying. Eric shielded Hale with his body, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. Captain Sullivan, we're surrounded, one of the soldiers shouted, his eyes wild with fear. Eric gritted his teeth, his gaze scanning the chaos around him. They were pinned down, no reinforcements in sight, ammunition running low. But retreat was not an option, not today. Eric's eyes snapped open. The airport's fluorescent lights glared down at him, pulling him back to the present. He wiped a trembling hand across his brow, his skin clammy with sweat. A woman in a sleek business suit walked by, her high heels clicking against the tile. She paused, glancing down at Eric. Her gaze lingered on the wooden box in his lap, but she said nothing. Instead, she pulled out her phone, lifted it to her ear, and walked away. Eric swallowed, his throat dry. The world kept moving, people rushing to their gates, families embracing, friends laughing. But no one looked at him. No one noticed the man who once stood tall in the face of death. No one saw the hero who had become invisible. Eric adjusted himself in the uncomfortable plastic chair, his back aching from both age and the weight of memories pressing down on him. He pulled the wooden box from his bag and placed it on his lap. The box was scuffed and worn, its edges chipped, but the weight of it was as heavy as the day he first received it. His gnarled fingers traced the edges of the box, and as they did, the present began to fade away. The sounds of the bustling airport dulled to a distant murmur, replaced by the haunting echoes of war. Afghanistan, 30 years ago. The night was black and unforgiving. The only light came from the sporadic bursts of gunfire that cut through the air like knives. Eric crouched behind a shattered Humvee, his heart pounding in his chest. Beside him, Private Hale lay bleeding, his leg mangled from shrapnel. "Stay with me, Hale," Eric said, pressing down on the wound. Blood seeped through his fingers, hot and sticky. "You're going to be fine." Hale's eyes fluttered open, glazed with pain. "Captain, I can't feel my leg." "Focus on me," Eric said, his voice firm. "You have a little girl waiting for you back home, right? What's her name?" Hale swallowed, his breath shallow. "Anna, she's 5. "Then you hold on. For Anna," Eric urged, his eyes fierce. "We're getting out of here." A nearby explosion rocked the ground, sending debris raining down over them. The air was thick with smoke, screams, and the relentless pop of gunfire. Eric's ears rang as he pulled Hale closer, shielding him with his body. Through the haze, Eric spotted the rest of his squad, pinned down and surrounded. Corporal Jenkins was dragging a wounded comrade toward cover, his face streaked with blood. Sergeant O'Connor fired round after round, his jaw clenched in defiance. "Captain Sullivan, we're surrounded," Jenkins shouted, his voice breaking. Eric glanced down at Hale, whose eyes were beginning to flutter closed. Number not on his watch. "Stay with me, Hale!" Eric roared. He ripped off his helmet and pressed it against Hale's head. "Think of Anna. Think of her smile. You're going to see her again. You hear me?" But Hale's eyes were closing, his breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. Eric gritted his teeth, the roar of the battlefield fading to a dull, oppressive hum. His hands shook as he pressed harder against the bleeding wound, his mind screaming that it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. Eric's eyes snapped open, and the sounds of the airport rushed back to him. The ding of the boarding announcements, the hum of conversations, the distant roar of a plane taking off. The wooden box still lay heavy in his lap, a symbol of everything he couldn't forget. He exhaled, his shoulders sagging under the weight of it all. How could the world keep moving on when his world was still trapped back in that battlefield, surrounded by blood, smoke, and the cries of the dying? "Sir?" Eric looked up. A flight attendant stood in front of him, her eyes soft with concern. "Are you all right?" Eric forced a smile, his jaw tight. "Yes, I'm fine." But he wasn't. Not even close. The attendant's eyes flicked to the wooden box. That's a Medal of Valor, isn't it?" Eric nodded, his eyes dropping back down to the box. "It's not for me," he murmured. "It's for the ones who never made it back." The airport lounge doors swung open with a force that echoed through the terminal. Every head turned as a man in a crisp military uniform strode in, his boots striking the tile floor in perfect, deliberate steps. General Marcus Hale, a man whose name carried weight in military circles, scanned the room with eyes as sharp as a hawk. At 52, Hale was a formidable presence. His square jaw clenched tight, his chest adorned with a display of medals, and his stride exuding a command that demanded immediate attention. Behind him, 2 military aides struggled to keep up, their expressions taut and serious. Hale's gaze swept the room, searching for the one man he owed his life to. "Where is he?" Hale's voice boomed through the terminal, and the room fell silent. "Where is the Medal of Valor recipient who was just disrespected?" A nervous murmur rippled through the crowd. The gate agent, now pale and visibly shaken, pointed a trembling finger toward the far corner of the waiting area. "He's over there, sir." Hale's jaw clenched, and his eyes narrowed as he followed the direction of the pointing finger. There, hunched over in a plastic chair, sat Eric Sullivan. Eric's shoulders sagged as he stared down at the wooden box in his lap. His hands were shaking, his eyes fixed on the torn ticket pieces that lay scattered like fallen leaves on the floor. Hale took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling beneath the weight of his own medals. Memories surged forward. Memories of Afghanistan, of that dark, smoke-filled day when Eric had saved his life. Afghanistan 30 years ago. "Captain Sullivan, we're going to die out here," Hale shouted, his leg bleeding profusely as he dragged himself across the dirt. The air was thick with smoke, gunfire, and the scent of burning oil. Eric was there in an instant, eyes blazing. "Not on my watch," he growled. grabbing Hale by the collar and pulling him to his feet. "Stay with me, soldier." "You hear me?" Hale's vision blurred as Eric wrapped his arm around him, practically carrying him through the hail of bullets. Hale could hear the screams of his comrades, the explosions, the crack of gunfire, but through it all he could hear Eric's voice. "Keep your eyes on me, Private. You're not dying here." The last thing Hale remembered before passing out was Eric's face, sweat-streaked, blood-splattered, but fiercely determined. Now, decades later, that same man sat alone in a crowded airport, his eyes distant and haunted. Hale strode forward, his jaws set. Every step echoed through the terminal, and the air seemed to crackle with tension. People watched, eyes wide, as the imposing figure of General Marcus Hale approached the old hunched man in the corner. Hale stopped in front of Eric and removed his hat, holding it against his chest. He straightened his spine and saluted, a slow, deliberate gesture of respect. "Captain Eric Sullivan," Hale said, his voice loud and clear, "it is my honor to stand before you." Eric's eyes lifted, confusion flickering in their depths. His gaze traveled up Hale's chest, past the medals, up to the familiar face. Recognition dawned slowly, like a sunrise breaking through the clouds. "Private Hale," Eric whispered, his voice cracking. "Not anymore, sir," Hale said, his eyes glistening. "Now it's General Hale, but you're still the bravest man I've ever known." Eric swallowed hard, his hand clutching the wooden box even tighter. Around them, the terminal had fallen completely silent. Passengers, staff, and even the janitor stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. Hale's gaze shifted to the torn ticket pieces still scattered at Eric's feet. His eyes darkened. "What happened here?" Hale asked, his voice steely. The gate agent stepped forward, his face ashen. "Sir, it was a misunderstanding. We didn't know he was a Medal of Valor recipient. Company policy." "Policy?" Hale's voice boomed, eyes flashing with fury. "This man carried me through a battlefield when he was bleeding out himself. This man saved more lives in one day than you will in a lifetime of pushing papers." The agent stammered, sweat beading on his brow. I didn't realize." "You didn't realize?" Hale took a step closer, looming over the agent. "Then maybe it's time you learned what real valor looks like." The room was silent. All eyes were on Hale and Eric. Even the influencers who had been posing for selfies now stood still, phones held limply at their sides. "This man," Hale continued, pointing at Eric, "is a hero, and you treated him like he was nothing." Hale turned to Eric, his expression softening. "Captain Sullivan," he said, his voice gentler now, "you saved my life. You saved dozens of lives. You deserve better than this." Eric shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just one man, General. Just one man." Hale knelt down, his eyes level with Eric's. "But to me, you were the only man that mattered that day." Eric's eyes welled up with tears, and his grip on the wooden box loosened. Around them, the crowd stood in the stunned silence, the weight of Hale's words hanging heavy in the air. General Hale rose to his feet, his imposing figure casting a long shadow over the gate agent. The young man's hands fidgeted nervously at his sides, eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. "What's your name, son?" Hale's voice was calm, but there was a dangerous edge beneath it. Jason," the gate agent stammered. "Jason Ward." Hale nodded, his jaw clenched tight. "Well, Jason Ward, I suggest you listen closely because you just made the worst mistake of your life." Jason swallowed, the color draining from his face. Around them, a crowd had begun to gather, drawn in by the commanding presence of the general and the palpable tension in the air. A few people pulled out their phones, cameras recording, whispers spreading like wildfire. Hale stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and Jason. "You see that man over there?" he said, pointing to Eric, who sat quietly with the wooden box still clutched in his hands. "That man is Captain Eric Sullivan, a Medal of Valor recipient. You know what that means?" Jason shook his head, his eyes wide. "It means he's one of the less than 3,000 men and women in the entire history of this nation to receive that honor," Hale said, his voice rising. "It means that while you were sitting behind this counter, Judging him for his old jacket and scuffed shoes, he was saving lives, including mine. Jason's eyes flicked to Eric, who remained motionless, staring down at the box in his lap. The box that held the medal and a lifetime of memories. "Sir, I didn't know," Jason whispered. Hale's fist clenched, his knuckles white. "You didn't know because you didn't care to know. You looked at him and saw an old man. You didn't see the hero who carried bleeding soldiers on his back through gunfire, who dragged me through a battlefield when I was too weak to stand." The crowd murmured, some shaking their heads in disbelief. One woman wiped a tear from her eye. A young boy clutched his mother's hand, his eyes locked on Eric. "You see," Hale continued, his voice firm, "respect isn't just about medals or uniforms. It's about what you do when no one's looking. And today you failed that test, son." Jason's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, I didn't mean..." "Sorry doesn't cut it," Hale said, his gaze like a blade. "You tore up his ticket. You tore up the last gift his son gave him. You treated him like trash, and now you're going to fix it." Jason nodded frantically, sweat dotting his brow. "I will, I promise." Hale turned to the crowd, his voice booming. "Ladies and gentlemen, you're looking at a man who wore the Medal of Valor, not for himself, but for the ones who never made it home. And today, we're going to give him the respect he's earned." The crowd erupted into applause. People stood up, some with tears in their eyes. The businessman who had been buried in his phone earlier now clapped with fervor, his eyes filled with regret. The young boy stared up at his mother. "Mom, is he a hero?" "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "A real one." Hale turned back to Jason. "Now get him his ticket, first class, and make sure he's treated with the honor he deserves." Jason scrambled to the counter, fumbling with the keyboard, his hands shaking as he reprinted the ticket. He rushed over to Eric, extending the new boarding pass with both hands, his head bowed. "Sir." "I'm so sorry," Jason said, his voice quivering. "I was wrong. Please forgive me." Eric looked at the ticket, then at Jason. The young man's eyes were red, his lower lip trembling. For a moment, Eric said nothing. Then he took the ticket and nodded. "It's all right, son. Now you know." Jason's shoulders sagged with relief, and he nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "Thank you, sir. Thank you for your service." Eric forced a small, weary smile. "Thank you for yours." Behind him, the crowd continued to clap, some holding their phones up to record the moment. Hale stepped forward, placing a hand on Eric's shoulder. "You okay, Captain?" Eric swallowed, his throat tight. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think so." "Good," Hale said, his voice gentler now. "Because we're not done here." Eric frowned, confusion flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Hale's eyes glinted with determination. "You saved my life 30 years ago, Captain. Now it's my turn to return the favor." General Hale stepped forward, his hand still resting firmly on Eric's shoulder. The room was now packed with onlookers, passengers, airport staff, families waiting to board. All eyes were fixed on the two men standing in the center of the terminal, a space that had become a stage for an unexpected act of valor and redemption. "Attention, everyone," Hale said, his voice booming through the terminal. "I'd like to tell you all a story about the man standing beside me." Eric's cheeks flushed red, his shoulders hunching as if to shrink away from the spotlight. Hale tightened his grip, his eyes locked on the crowd. "This man is Captain Eric Sullivan," Hale continued. 30 years ago, he was a Navy captain stationed in Afghanistan, and on a day that was supposed to be just another routine patrol, he became a hero. The murmurs in the crowd quieted, and a hush fell over the room. Even the children, once restless and noisy, now sat still, their eyes wide as they listened. On that day, Captain Sullivan's unit was ambushed. A roadside bomb detonated and chaos erupted. Men were screaming, bleeding, dying, but Captain Sullivan didn't run. No, he ran straight into the line of fire. Eric's jaw clenched and his hand trembled around the wooden box still clutched in his lap. The memories surged forward, the screams, the gunfire, the acrid scent of burning fuel. While everyone else was running for cover, Hale said, his voice thickening, Captain Sullivan carried Private Marcus Hale, that's me, through a storm of bullets and explosions. He dragged me out of the wreckage when I couldn't walk, when I couldn't even see. He carried me to safety. And because of him, I got to come home. I got to raise my daughter. I got to stand here today. A gasp echoed through the crowd. People exchanged glances, eyes wide, some blinking back tears. A woman in the front row covered her mouth, shaking her head as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "And what did Captain Sullivan get for his bravery?" Hale said, his voice dropping. "A Medal of Valor, the highest military honor, a medal he has never flaunted, never bragged about, never demanded respect for." Eric swallowed, his eyes glistening. He could feel the weight of every gaze on him, the same man who had been invisible just moments ago. "But today," Hale said, stepping back and sweeping his arm toward Eric, "we're going to give him the respect he deserves." The crowd erupted into applause, a thunderous wave of clapping and cheering that echoed through the terminal. People stood up, some wiping their eyes, others nodding in reverence. Jason, the gate agent, stepped forward, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. He looked at Eric, his eyes filled with guilt. "Sir, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't know." Eric nodded, his eyes soft. "It's okay, son. Now you do." A man in a business suit stepped forward, his eyes glistening. "My brother, he served in Iraq," the man said, his voice shaking. "He didn't make it home. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your service." Eric nodded, his throat too tight to speak. Then a young girl approached, her hands clasped in front of her. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, her hair tied in pigtails. She looked up at Eric, her big brown eyes shining. "Sir," she said softly, holding out a small, crumpled paper airplane. "I made this for you. It's a plane for a real hero." Eric's hands trembled as he took the paper airplane, his eyes swimming with tears. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking. The applause grew louder, the crowd clapping and cheering with renewed vigor. General Hale stepped back, his chest rising and falling as he fought to keep his own composure. "You see," Hale said, his voice rising over the crowd, "honor is not a seat in first class. It's the space a man holds in the hearts of those he's touched. And today we remember that while some medals can be worn, the greatest honors are carried in the hearts of men like Captain Sullivan." A woman in the back shouted, "God bless you, sir!" And the crowd erupted once more, their voices merging into a chorus of praise. Eric stood amidst the applause, the wooden box clutched in one hand, the paper airplane in the other. Tears streamed down his face, and for the first time in decades, he felt seen. Not as an old man in a worn-out jacket, but as a hero, a man whose sacrifices would not be forgotten. The applause slowly subsided, the claps echoing through the terminal until they faded to a reverent silence. The crowd remained standing, eyes fixed on Eric, who still clutched the wooden box and the paper airplane as if they were lifelines. General Hale turned sharply toward the gate agent, Jason, and the airline manager who had just arrived. The manager's face was ashen, his hands fidgeting nervously as he stepped forward. "Sir, I deeply apologize for what happened," the manager stammered, his eyes darting nervously between Hale and Eric. "It was a misunderstanding. Our staff didn't—" "A misunderstanding?" Hale cut him off, his voice a whip crack through the silence. "You tore up a Medal of Valor recipient's ticket. You humiliated him in front of everyone here. And now you're trying to call it a misunderstanding?" The manager swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing. "Sir, please, we didn't realize he was—" "You didn't realize he was what?" Hale snapped, stepping forward. "A hero? A man who bled for his country? A man who saved lives? You didn't realize because you didn't bother to look beyond the worn jacket and the scuffed shoes." The manager's face flushed red, sweat beaded on his brow. Jason stood behind him, his head bowed, eyes fixed on the floor. "This isn't just about a ticket," Hale said, his voice booming through the terminal. "This is about respect, about the men and women who gave everything so that we can sit in these comfortable airport lounges, sipping lattes and scrolling through our phones. And today, you failed them." The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement. A young woman in the front row wiped tears from her cheeks. A man in a military uniform saluted Eric, his eyes shining with unspoken admiration. Captain Sullivan didn't ask for special treatment, Hale continued, his voice softening as he looked down at Eric. He never has. All he ever asked for was to be treated with the respect he earned, and today you denied him even that. Eric shifted uncomfortably, his shoulders hunched as if he wanted to disappear, but Hale kept his gaze fixed on the manager, his expression stern. So what are you going to do about it? Hale asked, his eyes narrowing. How are you going to make this right? The manager swallowed, his gaze falling to the floor. We will upgrade Captain Sullivan to first class immediately, and we will issue a formal apology to him and to all veterans who may have been treated unfairly. That's not enough, Hale said, crossing his arms. What about the policy that allowed this to happen? What about the policy that prioritizes celebrities and social media influencers over men like Captain Sullivan? The manager shifted uncomfortably, his cheeks burning. We will review it, sir. Effective immediately. Not good enough, Hale said, his eyes blazing. I want that policy rewritten, and I want Captain Sullivan to receive a lifetime first-class pass on every flight this airline operates. Because if anyone deserves a seat in first class, it's him. The crowd erupted into applause once more, some shouting, some cheering. Jason's shoulders slumped, his eyes red and swollen. Yes, sir, the manager said, nodding rapidly. Absolutely, we will do that. Good, Hale said, stepping back. Now, apologize to the man whose ticket you tore up. Jason stepped forward, his hands wringing together nervously. He looked at Eric, who sat quietly, his eyes fixed on the floor. Sir, Jason said, his voice shaking. I am so sorry for what I did. I was wrong. I judged you by your appearance, and I didn't see the man you are, the hero you are. Please forgive me. Eric looked up, his eyes tired but soft. I forgive you, son, he said gently. Now you know. Jason nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. Thank you, sir, and thank you for your service. Eric nodded, his jaw working as he swallowed down the lump in his throat. Hale stepped forward, placing a firm hand on Eric's shoulder. Captain Sullivan, Hale said, his voice firm yet gentle, you're not alone. You never were. And from this day forward, this airline and everyone in it will remember that. The crowd applauded once more, louder and more fervent than before. A group of veterans stepped forward, each taking turns shaking Eric's hand. A woman pressed a small American flag pin into his palm, her eyes wet with tears. Thank you, she whispered, for my brother. He didn't come back. Eric nodded, his throat too tight to respond. Then, Hale leaned in close, his eyes locked onto Eric's. Come on, Captain, let's get you to your seat. Eric nodded, his hands trembling as he clutched the wooden box and the crumpled paper airplane. As he stood, the crowd parted to make way for him. And as he walked down the terminal, the applause followed him, a hero finally recognized. Eric Sullivan walked down the jet bridge, the wooden box pressed tightly against his chest. The applause from the terminal still echoed in his ears, a haunting refrain of validation and respect he hadn't felt in decades. General Hale walked beside him, his towering presence a silent shield, as if he were still that young Private Hale, determined to protect the man who had once saved his life. Are you all right, Captain? Hale asked as they reached the aircraft door. Eric swallowed, his throat still tight. I didn't expect any of this. You deserved every moment, Hale said, his eyes softening. And more. They stepped onto the plane, and the flight attendant's eyes widened. She snapped to attention, her gaze darting between Hale and Eric. Sir, welcome aboard, she said, her voice slightly shaky. We have your seat ready in first class. Thank you, Eric said, his voice barely above a whisper. The attendant led them down the aisle, and as they walked, passengers craned their necks, some whispering, some staring. A few took out their phones to record, but no one dared speak. When they reached first class, the attendant gestured to the plush, oversized seat, a seat Eric had never sat in, not in his entire life. He sank into it, the soft leather molding around his tired frame. The attendant bent down, her face level with Eric's. Sir, she said, her eyes shimmering, Thank you for your service, and welcome to first class. Eric managed a nod, his jaw clenched as he fought to keep his composure. Hale took the seat across the aisle, his broad shoulders barely fitting into the luxurious chair. The other passengers watched, some in silence, some with tears in their eyes. The businessman from the terminal stepped forward, his face tight with emotion. "Sir," he said, leaning down to Eric, "my brother was a Marine. He didn't come back. Thank you, for all of them." Eric swallowed, unable to speak, and nodded. The plane began its taxi down the runway, the engines humming beneath them. Eric leaned back against the seat, his eyes drifting closed. The exhaustion of the day washed over him, mingling with the haunting memories of a battlefield he could never leave behind. Afghanistan, 30 years ago, the air was thick with the scent of burning rubber and blood. Eric crouched behind a makeshift barricade, his arms wrapped around Private Hale, whose leg bled profusely. The screams of wounded men echoed through the smoke-filled air. "Captain!" Sergeant O'Connor shouted, his face streaked with dirt and blood. "We're pinned down. We need to move." Eric's eyes darted around, assessing the chaos. Bullets zinged past, striking the dirt just inches from his head. The world seemed to spin, and the sounds of the battlefield blurred into a single, deafening roar. "Captain!" Hale's voice was weak, his face pale. I can't feel my leg." "You're going to be fine," Eric said, his voice firm. "You're going to see Anna again. Remember her smile?" Hale nodded weakly, his eyes beginning to roll back. "Stay with me, soldier," Eric shouted, his grip tightening around Hale's shoulder. "Stay with me." Eric took a deep breath, his mind sharpening, adrenaline surging. He rose to his feet, dragging Hale up with him. Bullets zipped through the air, but Eric didn't flinch. He moved forward, step by step, carrying Hale on his back, each step a battle against gravity and pain. "Come on!" he shouted to the remaining men, his voice raw. "We're getting out of here!" Explosions erupted around them, the ground shaking beneath his boots. The world blurred into a haze of fire and smoke, but Eric kept moving. He kept carrying Hale, one step at a time, refusing to let go, refusing to surrender. Eric's eyes snapped open, the hum of the plane's engines pulling him back to the present. His breath came in short, shallow bursts, and sweat beaded on his brow. He lifted a trembling hand to his chest, feeling the cool metal of the Medal of Valor box beneath his shirt. Across the aisle, General Hale watched him carefully, concern etched in every line of his face. "Nightmare?" Hale asked gently. Eric nodded, his jaw clenching. "I can still hear them," he said, his voice tight. "I can still hear their screams." Hale leaned forward, his eyes fierce. "You saved lives that day, Captain. You brought us home." "Not all of you," Eric said, his voice breaking. "Not all of you." Hale's eyes softened. "But you brought me back. And because of that, Anna got to keep her father." Eric's eyes glistened, and he looked away, staring out the window as the clouds rolled by beneath them. For the first time in years, he felt something uncoil inside him, a knot of guilt and pain that had been strangling him for decades. The flight attendant appeared, holding a tray with a glass of water and a folded napkin. "Captain Sullivan," she said softly, placing the glass in front of him. "The pilot asked me to give you this." Eric unfolded the napkin. Inside was a handwritten note. "To Captain Eric Sullivan, the bravest man on this plane. Thank you for your service. Captain Lewis." Eric's eyes blurred as he read the words, the letters smudging together as the weight of the day's events finally crashed over him. "Captain Sullivan," Hale said, his voice low and firm. "You're not just one of many. You're the reason men like me gotta come home." Eric looked down at the wooden box in his hands, the Medal of Valor resting within, a symbol of a day he could never forget, a day he never wanted to remember. But now, in the silence of the plane, he could finally breathe. For the first time in years, he felt seen. He felt honored. He felt like a hero. As the plane began its descent, the cabin lights dimmed, casting a soft golden glow over the passengers. Eric stared out the window, watching the city lights below come into focus, a sprawling sea of twinkling lights that stretched as far as the eye could see. Across the aisle, General Hale remained vigilant, his gaze never straying from Eric. Despite the soft leather seat and the soothing hum of the engines, Hale's posture was still rigid, as if he were back on the battlefield, watching over his men. The plane landed with a gentle thud, and as it taxied toward the gate, the pilot's voice echoed through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we would like to extend a special thank you to Captain Eric Sullivan, a Medal of Valor recipient and a true American hero. Captain Sullivan, we salute you for your bravery, your sacrifice, and your service to this nation." The cabin erupted into applause. Some passengers stood, clapping fervently, while others wiped tears from their eyes. The businessman who had earlier spoken to Eric now placed a hand over his heart, nodding solemnly. Eric lowered his head, his cheeks flushed with both pride and embarrassment. It was too much. He wasn't used to this kind of attention. He never had been. The flight attendants lined up at the front of the plane as the passengers began to disembark. As Eric and Hale stood to leave, each attendant saluted Eric, their faces solemn and respectful. "Thank you for your service, sir," one of them said, her voice wavering. "It was my honor," Eric murmured, his grip tightening on the wooden box. Inside the terminal, a hero's welcome. As they stepped off the plane and into the terminal, a crowd had gathered. Families, military personnel, airport staff. Word of what had happened had spread quickly, and now they were all here, waiting for the man who had once been forgotten. The first to approach was a woman holding a small child. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she reached out a trembling hand. "Sir," she said, her voice breaking, "my husband was a Marine. He didn't come home. But thank you for bringing other sons, fathers, and brothers back to their families. Thank you for being the kind of man they could count on." Eric swallowed thickly, his throat tight as he nodded. "I'm sorry for your loss," he whispered. The woman squeezed his hand, tears slipping down her cheeks. "He was proud to serve with men like you." Next came a group of veterans, their uniforms decorated with medals and patches, their faces weathered but proud. They shook Eric's hand one by one, each with a solemn expression. "Welcome home, Captain," one of them said, his grip firm. "It's been a long time coming." Eric nodded, unable to find the words. Around them, the crowd clapped, cheered, and snapped photos. Children waved small American flags, their eyes wide as they watched the hero being honored. The CEO's apology. A sudden commotion near the gate caught Eric's attention. The airline CEO, a woman in a tailored suit and high heels, pushed her way through the crowd, her expression a mixture of regret and determination. "Captain Sullivan," she said, extending her hand, "I am deeply, deeply sorry for what happened to you today. Our company failed you. I failed you. And I promise that from this day forward, we will do better." Eric studied her hand, then shook it, his grip firm but not unkind. "It's not just me you failed," he said softly. "It's every veteran who was forgotten." The CEO nodded, her jaw tight. "You're right, and that's why, effective immediately, we are launching the Honor Above All program veterans, and Medal of Valor recipients will be given lifetime first-class upgrades on all 4 flights. It's not enough to repay the debt while you, but it's a start." Eric nodded, his expression unreadable. "It's not about the seat," he said. "It's about respect." "And you have ours," the CEO said, her voice cracking. "From this day forward, you have it." A moment of reflection. The Medal of Valor. As the crowd began to disperse, Eric walked toward a quiet corner of the terminal, the noise and chaos fading into the background. He sank into a chair, the wooden box still clutched in his hands. General Hale sat down beside him, his eyes fixed on the box. "You ever take it out?" Hale asked, his voice gentle. Eric shook his head, his fingers trembling as they traced the edges of the box. "I can't. Every time I try, all I see are the faces of the men who didn't come home, the ones I couldn't save." Hale nodded, his gaze heavy. "That's not what they'd want. They'd want you to wear it, to remember them. Not as the men you couldn't save, but as the men you fought for." Eric swallowed, his throat thick with emotion. He opened the box, his eyes locked onto the Medal of Valor, the silver star glinting beneath the terminal lights, its blue ribbon pristine and untarnished. He lifted the medal, feeling its cool weight in his hand. "I don't wear it for me," Eric said, his voice a broken whisper. "I wear it for them." Hale leaned forward, his eyes fierce. Then wear it. Let the world see what a real hero looks like." Eric nodded, tears slipping down his weathered cheeks as he draped the medal around his neck. The cool metal pressed against his chest, and for the first time, he felt its true weight, not as a burden, but as a badge of honor. The final salute. As Eric and Hale exited the terminal, they were greeted by a line of military personnel standing at attention, saluting the man who had once carried them through hell and back. Eric stood tall, the Medal of Valor gleaming against his chest, the wooden box tucked safely under his arm. He raised his hand, returning the salute, his chin held high. In that moment, he was no longer the old man in the worn-out jacket. He was Captain Eric Sullivan, the man who refused to leave his brothers behind, the man who carried others to safety when no one else could, the man who had finally, after all these years, come home. Epilogue, a legacy remembered. Weeks later, a viral video circulated the internet, a video of General Hale confronting the gate agent, of the crowd rising to their feet, of Eric walking through the terminal, his Medal of Valor shining in the light. The video amassed millions of views and the comments flooded in. "Thank you for your service, Captain Sullivan. You're a hero. We need more men like him. Honor is not a seat, it's what you carry in your heart." The airline's CEO appeared on national television, her face grave. "We failed to honor those who secured our freedom. Today we pledge to never forget their sacrifices again." The Honor Above All program was launched, and every veteran who flew with the airline received a special first-class upgrade, each one accompanied by a note. "For those who served, for those who sacrificed, welcome home." And in a small, quiet house, Eric Sullivan sat by the window, the Medal of Valor resting in its wooden box on the table beside him. Outside, children played, their laughter echoing in the air. Eric watched them, his eyes clear, his heart full. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. Values learned from the story: respect and recognition. The story emphasizes the importance of respecting those who have sacrificed and served the nation. Eric Sullivan is a silent hero, a retired veteran who once risked his life to save his comrades, yet he is now forgotten and treated as a nobody. This reflects the reality that many war heroes return home only to be neglected and overlooked by society. The appearance of General Hale serves as a powerful reminder that real heroes don't wear capes. They are ordinary people with extraordinary stories. Don't judge a book by its cover. Jason, the airline employee, judged Eric solely based on his appearance, an old man in a worn-out jacket, without realizing that he was a Medal of Valor recipient. This teaches us a valuable lesson about making snap judgments. Every person has a story, and we have no right to belittle them based on appearances. The power of gratitude and awareness. General Hale not only stands up for Eric, but also reminds everyone that respect is not something that can be bought with money or status. Hale's gratitude toward Eric is not just for his own life, but for all the fallen comrades and the silent heroes whose sacrifices remain unrecognized. Healing through acknowledgement. Eric had been living in the shadows, feeling like a forgotten old man. But when Hale honors him publicly, it reignites a sense of purpose and validation. This is a powerful reminder that recognition and a simple thank you can be incredibly healing, especially for veterans who carry the heavy burden of their past. 2. Lessons from the story. Never forget the silent heroes. Those who fought for our freedom and safety deserve our recognition and respect. Not all heroes wear uniforms every day. Some sit quietly in airport lounges, carrying the weight of wars and battles we can't imagine. Respect is not a seat, it's an action. The story emphasizes that respect is not found in a first-class seat or any luxury item. It's in how we treat those who have served. Respect is when we stand up for those who can no longer stand up for themselves, just like General Hale did. It's never too late to right a wrong. Jason, the airline employee, ultimately realizes his mistake and apologizes. This shows that even when we make a mistake, there is always an opportunity to make amends if we are willing to acknowledge our wrongdoing and correct it. Heroes aren't just found on battlefields. Eric became a hero not just because he risked his life in combat, but because he remained humble and kind even after the war. Hale also became a hero by using his power and influence to stand up for Eric, a reminder that we don't need to be soldiers to be heroes. Sometimes it's enough to simply stand up for what is right. Conclusion: this story is a powerful lesson about gratitude, respect, and the importance of not judging people by appearances. It reminds us that everyone has value in a story. We must honor those who have served, especially the silent veterans who carry the scars of war. Respect is not a privilege. It is a right that everyone deserves. A powerful quote from the story: honor is not a seat in first class. It's the space a man holds in the hearts of those he's touched. The story not only conveys a message about respect, but also awakens our sense of justice and compassion, values we must never forget.